Hey everyone, Genome here. Well, casual unboxing threw out the gauntlet, and I am here to happily pick it up. For this short little video, I'm going to go over my favorite villains and heroes of comic books. Just so you know, I've been out of comics for a long time. I think I got out in the early 90s, mid-90s, somewhere in that point. And some of the biggest things going at that time were, things like X-Force was fairly new and had a lot of hype behind it. The death of Superman was around the corner, but I think I'd already gotten out of the game by that point. Things like that. A lot of the X titles were selling real well. And, artists like Texeira, Liefeld, Lee, those are some of the biggest names at the time. Even Mobius was a fairly big name back then. But anyway, I digress. So, Casual Unboxing asked to name my favorite hero or villain. So I figured I'll just go ahead and do both. Why not, right? Maybe will that double my chances for winning? No, probably not. But anyway, let's get down to it. So I was always more of a Marvel guy than mostly any other comics. I got into a little bit of DC, but really just mostly Batman and a little bit of Aquaman a long time ago. And I like Dark Horse comics too. They had some pretty interesting things, especially their Aliens vs. Predator series. But really, I usually just got behind Marvel, and that was the vast majority of titles that I got. I even have some older Impact comics when their short-lived run. But, Image hadn't come around yet, IDW. There wasn't too many other players out there other than Dark Horse was basically the third party. There wasn't a whole lot else out there, at least for me. So my favorite hero, just a little bit about the heroes. I always liked them a little more on the base power level side, the more human characters, if you would. I didn't like too many of the metahuman heroes just because it seemed very difficult to have villains present a challenge to them, maybe. But I just always like the more grounded in semi-reality heroes than I did the more outlandish ones. Like I never cared for Thor or Hulk or Superman, not really. All the ones that were all but invincible, So my favorite hero in the Marvel Universe was most definitely the Punisher. I always liked that comic. Maybe I had aggressive tendencies when I was younger or something, I'm not sure. But I first got back in him back in the mid-'80s. And I collected a lot of Punisher comics, both Punisher and Punisher War Journal. And I think, as I recall, I got into them simply by the cover of the graphic novel. It was a hardback, and I think it was just called The Punisher. I think it was by Carl Potts, and I'll get you a picture of it over here in this area somewhere. But I remember seeing a poster of it, which I wound up getting later on too, and it's just an incredible poster and so badass looking. So figure I had to start getting into this character. So I read a few things by it, and fun fact is, I believe Jim Lee, I don't remember if he started from the first issue. I have to go take a look at this. I don't think he did, but he did a lot of the earlier Punisher War Journal artwork. So that just tells you the amount of quality and great artistry that went into that series. The regular version of the Punisher, I believe it was 75 cents, and I believe Punisher War Journal was either $1 or $1.25, something like that. So, the War Journal was a little fancier version of it. But anyway, to the character, Frank Castle, the Punisher. There's been several movie iterations of it. One had Dolph Lundgren in it. The other was Tom Jane. And I believe there's a newer one and a TV show, but I haven't really seen those. They don't seem a whole bunch of interest to me. I didn't like where the character went after Marvel seemed to change gears after the mid-'90s, But he was always my favorite. He had a motivation you could understand, and it was a little more grounded in reality. So basically, he was just a man bent on vengeance because his family was killed by criminals, and it wasn't some superpowered criminal or some galaxy threatening malevolent presence that did it. It was just drug dealers, and so it was a normal but horrific crime happening to a normal family. This guy was a Vietnam vet and just come back and living his life, and then his family was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were killed. So his motivation was pretty simple, to not only get back at the people who'd taken his family, but basically any criminals in general that were involved in violence. he had an especially intense hatred of drug dealing kind of criminals. And so he would go back and basically kill them, you know, and it was a little bit of a draconian response, but you could kind of see his motivation, you know. It's like he's got nothing left to live for, and he just wants to take out as many of the bad guys as he can before, you know, he's snuffed out. You know, he's going to be a short-lived character. He's not going to be around forever, that kind of lifestyle. And he's playing around in a world full of superhumans, you know. But it's just him and his gun and his geek friend out there. But I always found the character very interesting. I always thought of him as a more realistic Batman, you know. He had a code that most of us can understand. Most of us can understand vengeance and the need for revenge. Where Batman, while his code was interesting because it showed how hard it would be to keep adhering to that code of not killing people, it's a little less believable, especially in as many situations where he was in, where he had repeat bad guys that were just causing murder and mayhem all around him, but he would just keep locking them up so they could get out again. Well, the Punisher didn't have that problem. You know, his enemies tended to stay gone forever. And so he didn't have a whole lot of recurring memorable villains, you know. Sometimes there'd be tie-ins, especially when he was teamed up with another hero. And I think Spider-Man was the most regular one, along with Daredevil. And both those guys had real strict codes about killing people, which often put him at odds. It made it kind of interesting, too, the dynamic between the two different ideologies. But, yeah, it was definitely Frank Castle, the Punisher, was definitely my favorite Marvel hero. So who was my favorite Marvel villain? Because it's going to be just between Marvel, honestly. It was always Juggernaut. I always loved Kane Marco, the Juggernaut, and he was a really interesting character. A lot of, especially a Marvel side, a lot of their characters, at least their villains, were just not fleshed out very well. You know, there wasn't a whole lot behind them other than they were bad guys doing bad things. And while Juggernaut certainly was that kind of character, and he seemed, I don't know, fairly straightforward for the most part, the whole premise behind him was very interesting. You know, he was brother of Charles Xavier, the leader of the X-Men, or at least the founding father of the X-Men anyway. And it was his brother-in-law, if memory serves, who found a gem out in some Asian rainforest, and it turned him into this, you know, this hulking bad guy who is nearly indestructible. He was shown, for instance, on occasion, just beating the hell out of Thor, and Thor had to call upon the God Force to even slow him down, and it still didn't kill him or anything. So it showed him as a serious, you know, world-level threat, and you could see him taking on a whole team of X-Men from time to time. But I thought his design looked kind of cool. His superpower of once he got moving, nothing could stop him was, I guess, interesting. I mean, that wasn't really the big part of him. But what I found interesting about him was the gem. They gave him his powers, and specifically, he was basically a manifestation of another being in another dimension. The being's name was Sidorak in the Crimson Cosmos. And the gem basically allowed Juggernaut, Kane Marco, to be the avatar for Sidorak. It just gave him a fraction of Sidorak's power, because Sidorak was this, amazingly powerful deity kind of thing, as far as magical power in the Marvel Universe. So I thought that was kind of cool. He was like the little, for lack of a better word, avatar for the deity in the Marvel Universe. And it just kind of set him apart from a lot of the other real kind of bland, bad guys and protagonists they put out there. It was also interesting, the dynamic, him being the brother-in-law and so thus family of Charles Xavier. So that would put them at odds at times. So that was pretty cool. And he could sit there and trade blows with, people like the Hulk, and he beat up the Thing a few times. And so he was just, I thought he was a pretty good character. And it was kind of cool too, because he had a partner of crime. For all of his power, he still kind of kept the mindset of a smaller time crook, He had his partner, it was Black Tom, who kind of was the mastermind behind some of their more, more benign schemes. So they had this kind of just friendship, it was just like two guys in a pub out there planning a heist, But this guy could lift buildings and trains with no problem. So I always thought he's a really interesting villain. So yeah, those are my two favorites. The hero being the Punisher, and he's definitely an anti-hero, so I don't even know if you could call him a hero in the world, other than, you know, he has this kind of ephemeral mission to eliminate the bad guys and help the innocent. So I guess he's almost like in the vein of Venom, who is also an anti-hero. You know, Venom had his own code of helping the innocent because he was the innocent himself who was wronged by Peter Parker, and at least in his own warped mind. And he killed people as well. So yeah, the Punisher was my favorite hero, and the Juggernaut was my favorite villain. I'll go ahead and throw some runners-up in there, just to have it out there so you can kind of get a gleaning of what I was into at the time. Runner-up hero, favorite heroes, in no particular order. And these cover not just Marvel, but there's a DC one in there too. Captain America, always liked him. Once again, another mostly grounded in, as far as comics goes, reality character, but you know, both an unwavering sense of courage and selflessness, which was always kind of a nice thing. And it seems kind of hokey at times, but I just always liked him. Batman, of course, in DC. You know, Batman needs no explanation of why he's cool. Plus, most of the artwork in either Detective Comics or Batman or Shadow of the Bat or any other series of them is usually just top notch. They didn't put bad artists on his comic at all. I always like the X-Men Gambit was cool. He was a little more of a lower powered character, but they really fleshed him out well, being a thief that steals from thieves, and his design looked really cool, and he had kind of a interesting love dynamic with Rogue, you know, one that can never be fully realized because of her power. Iceman was alright. I liked him. I know, I just liked ice characters, but kind of cool, you know, cold characters. I was never big on the flame characters. I like more of the water and ice characters, you know. So he was pretty cool, and he wound up getting really powerful later on in comics lore. Moon Knight was just, you know, a little bit better than average human, who had a sweet character design, and usually he made a lot more guest appearances than he had his own regular comic, you know. But yeah, his artwork was always really good, and I just liked the character design of him a lot. U.S. Agent, and there's a weird one. A lot of people don't know who he is, but basically, for a while, Captain America was dead, sort of, to the world. And to fill the void, U.S. Agent was made. He had kind of a black, red, and white outfit, and he was, you know, physically far superior to Captain America. Like, he could lift, like, I think it was 10 tons or something like that, so he could pick up, like, cars and that sort of thing, like Spider-Man level strength. But he was kind of unstable, and he was a kind of a bad representation of, you know, Captain America's legacy, because he would slip up, and I believe he killed some people from time to time. Didn't mean to, but he did it. He wasn't good at controlling his power. And rounded off is Psylocke. She was an X-Man as well. She was really interesting in the fact that she was kind of a garden variety psychic, but she could focus her psychic power into like things like blades that would just completely overload and could even kill people. She was an assassin for a while. Her consciousness was put into another body, like a female ninja's body or something. It was kind of a weird little story, but it was interesting. Some runners-up for bad guys, villains. Loki, I always liked him. He was kind of the behind-the-scenes manipulator. I guess it kind of tried to draw on that a little bit from the movies that are coming out nowadays. They kind of portray him like that, but he's actually behind some pretty big events in the Marvel Universe, like Acts of Vengeance and all. But he was subtle. It's one thing I don't like about it in the movies. They really underpowered him. Because he was quite the threat in power level and intelligence and magical ability. Mephisto, I thought Mephisto was a really cool character. He's kind of the, Marvel's version of the devil, but he doesn't claim to be that character or, that entity at all. It's just what people named him, because he had a penchant for making deals for people's souls. But basically, he was just another extra-dimensional, not deity. Well, I guess you could call him a deity. Another extra-dimensional entity, I guess, if you will. But he was real powerful. But once again, he was a little more subtle. He didn't go in there with raw power and try to get things done for the most part. He was kind of a schemer, a lot like Loki was. Abomination, I thought he had a pretty cool design. and he was one of the few villains who could stand toe-to-toe with Hulk for a while, which made him kind of interesting. And the fact that he retained his intelligence after the Game of Mutation was also a nice touch. Crossbones, he was the completely human, I wouldn't call him arch-enemy, but the henchman to the arch-enemy of Red Skull, of Captain America. So he and Crossbones had a lot of good little throwdowns, and Crossbones was, like I said, he was just completely human. He had no augmentation like Captain America did, but he could still fight Cap, mostly to a standstill at times. And I thought he had a pretty cool design. And he had a pretty cool little story arc where Red Skull had fired him, basically, and all he wanted to be was a henchman. You know, he just wanted to be the bruiser for Red Skull. So they showed him doing this abduction and brainwashing somebody, and then after months and months and months, finally going back to Red Skull and getting his job back on a probationary basis. But he was an interesting character, I thought, mostly once again because he's completely human. You know, playing around in a world full of metahumans, you know. Magneto was an interesting character as far as bad guys go, as the X-Men's, I guess, premier enemy. Very, very powerful villain, but his upbringing kind of gave him a lot more depth than most villains do, at least in comic books. The fact that what he had to go through, and I can't remember if his parents did, but I know the concentration camp stories that he was involved in was kind of a little bit heart-wrenching if you think about it. And so couple that with him being a mutant and being hated by a lot of the population, and you could kind of see his take on things. He's not a villain you really hate because you can kind of see where his ideology is coming from. You know, he doesn't really have any great plans for wealth or power or domination. He just wants a world full of mutants at that point, people who won't make him an outcast and people who won't, you know, try to hurt him and his ilk, you know. So he was an interesting character. To a lesser extent, Apocalypse is also kind of cool. The fact that he's this, like the original mutant on Earth. And by the way, he was terrible in that movie. Oh, they butchered that movie so bad. But yeah, the fact that he was a very, very, very powerful mutant, but chose not to fight. If you'll notice a pattern in most of my villains, most of them kind of work behind the scenes. In fact, other than maybe Crossbones, Abomination, and Juggernaut, my favorite, most of these are kind of a little more sly, wily characters as far as villains go. But Apocalypse would pit people against, or mutants against each other, and he was a survival of the fittest kind of guy. So basically he was just trying to pare down all the chaff and leave only the most powerful mutants behind for his new world order. And of course he'd be the leader of it. But so he was an interesting character in that regard. And finally, I like Sabretooth. He was like Wolverine's more feral cousin, if you will. I thought he was a lot cooler. I never liked Wolverine as a character, really, but I thought Sabretooth was pretty cool. His design was nice. He had more of a natural look to him. And they portrayed him as, you know, as a pretty feral guy and a nasty person. So, yeah, those are my runners-up. The Riddler was okay. Of course, the Joker's okay in DC. But really, I think that would be my main picks there for runners-up. So, there you have it. Casual unboxing. That dragged on a little bit longer than I thought it would, but just thought I'd give you a good video there. So thanks for putting that idea into my head, because once again, it gave me an excuse to shoot another video anyway. And I'll probably do a lot more of a comic book series in the future, because I can start digging through some of my old comic stash, the ones I still have, and maybe going over some of the storylines that I really liked. But in any case, I really appreciate you giving me the idea. And thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll be sure to bring more content your way. And I might try to shoot another video today for another piece of 80s culture that I think needs a little more time in the limelight, in the spotlight. So I appreciate you all watching, and this is Genome out.